Good evening from our headquarters in Kiev. This is the Sunday show of the Hromadske International, the only prime-time show explaining Eastern European geopolitical storm in English, and I'm Natalia Humenyuk. We had a turbulent week in Eastern Europe, and we are here to explain it. First of all, the elections in Armenia as well. We are following up the protests in Belarus and what has happening today in Moscow, as we have new detention. As well, we will go further and investigate what's happening with the e-declaration law, which puts pressure on the anti-corruption activists here in Ukraine. As well, we'll discuss Kremlin-Trump connection, thanks to Mark Galeotti, a senior researcher on the region. I also encourage you to go to our webpage. There are more articles there to follow. You can read all our reports. There is in-depth coverage of numerous issues. So please go as well. If you would like to have content in Russian or in Ukrainian, you can also have it. And I'll be back in a second. So the ruling Republican Party is leading the exit polls in Armenia. That's what we know so far. We just have the polls had been closed a bit more than an hour ago, and we also have the second party is Tsarukyan bloc with 25%. That's what we know. There were three more parties and 4 blocks in this race, but they have less results, but we'll follow on them. What's important to understand that these parliamentary elections are special because Armenia is switching from the semi-presidential to the parliamentarian republic, and there is a lot of new things in these elections. For instance, there were opening polls, there is a bit different system, so there is a major change, and we managed to call to Yerevan in order to know more. I also would like to draw your attention that there were, in social media, there were numbers of tweets which were fixing the wrongdoings of the elections. For instance, we can see one of them about the polling station in Yerevan. For instance, I would ask my team to put it on the screen, the tweets we had selected to you. So, for instance, here there was the tweet where was stationed that the polling station in Yerevan, unidentified thugs are buying votes and intimidating voters just outside the polling station. There was another tweet in the social media. Also, we are following, of course, the fact-checked and good sources. They were also mentioning the violations at the polls. But in generally, we've heard the election. There were numbers of the observers. So I would pass this word to our guest from Yerevan. We are calling to Ovanes Nikogosyan, who is an adjunct lecturer at American University of Armenia. Ovanes, good to see you from Yerevan. So we know there is a new system. There is a parliament election. Armenia is switching on to the parliamentary republic from the semi-presidential. But the first question would be how the elections are going in general today with all these new things. So we know about we can follow the election live. So how would you assess the day?
Hi, first of all, thanks for having me. The elections are, well, so far so good. There are irregularities obviously reported by many parties around, including by almost 20,000 observers, including from OSCE, ODIHR, and other internal and international organizations. But the quality of the irregularities is suggesting that those are only, scattered, in different precincts and are barely systematic. But what is more important, I think, what I can elaborate deeper about, is the meaning of these elections. These are the first parliamentary elections following the constitutional amendments of December 2015. As you rightly mentioned, transitioning Armenia into a fully fledged parliamentary republic, to which Armenia has been going since the re-establishment of its independence in 1990. Actually, the Declaration of Independence of August 1990 proclaimed parliamentary republic. Then the first constitution was adopted to establish a strong presidential system following the Karabakh War in 1995. Then the constitution was amended in 2005, transitioning to a semi-presidential system. And now we are finally going to where we originally belonged to. That's parliamentary system.
But still, what it would mean in practice, for instance, what we can assume the governing party, the Republican Party, if they get the most of the votes, that still them would form the government, as we know, the parliament would vote for the president next year. So what we can expect, what political change we can expect from this new parliament? Of course, we don't know yet the results, but maybe you can also elaborate more on that, about the chances and to what would be the impact?
Well, basically, the textbook explanation of this change is that in parliamentary republics, the political system becomes stronger. The political parties become stronger, and you gradually do the transit from individualistic parties to one-man shows, basically, to more systematic political system.
But what would it mean from the point of view of the political ideology? So still, do we know, can we expect any political change and the change of the political path of Armenia? We know there are 5 parties taking part in this election, the 4 political blocs. So would we expect that there would be the same party governing Armenia, and would there be any change in their policy? And we're speaking about the internal politics and as well external foreign policy.
Well, let me dwell on the foreign policy part. By far, all the political parties contesting, as well as blocs, as you rightly mentioned, contesting in these elections, barely have any differences in foreign policy agenda. With maybe one exception, all the parties are, arguing for stronger ties with Russia, for the maintenance of closer ties with the European Union, with stronger ties with the United States, and basically continuing this foreign policy of balance that Armenia has been, following for a number of years now. But obviously, since the political parties have no basic changes in their foreign policy platforms, they also don't have any major, differences on their approach to Nagorno-Karabakh resolution, with the exception of one. The Armenian National Congress, led by the first president of the country, says that the Republic of Armenia shall move faster towards building consensus with Azerbaijan.
Ovana, then what would be the difference between the parties if we're speaking about the Armenian population?
Well, the difference is very banal. Let me put it this way. Given the recent electoral circles in many more developed countries, the party in government, the Republicans, are trying to be more reserved, more accurate with their promises to the electorate. They have been running this campaign on the premises of security and progress, slogan, and they were saying that we are ready for change. We will change ourselves, and we will change our country, and we are ambitious enough for that, and we have enough professionals for that. The others were not shy to give more populist, obviously, promises to the population as well as to the external powers. For example, one of the political blocs, the Tsarukan bloc, so-called, the leader of this bloc, one of the richest men in this country, promised 15 billion investment in the Armenian economy, which shortly became subject for trolling by the other parties. One of those promising another 17 million, the other 22 billion. The Communist Party, for example, which is also running in this election, surprisingly, has promised $100 billion of investment, which obviously is I think just funny. But that is just to say that the political campaign has been marked both with some, measured, some reasonable promises by the government, by the party in government, by the majority party, and by very much populist, promises by the other parties, promising more jobs, more, social security guarantees, more, better healthcare system and everything, which, however, hasn't been backed by, economic analysis, for example. The ideological, as you are framing it, ideological part of the campaign has been missing in these elections. It was more for the government party to argue that they will be keeping up with the reforms, and the others, scattering these different populist, promises, just running on the mood of the, taking on the mood of the electorate, not very much, based in, calculations or analysis. So it has been pretty much 21st century campaign full of, these false, not false, but, these post-truth, politics things with a lot of fact-checking has been done by the media, by the way.
The Ukrainian politician had to declare their wealth according to the new electronic system. They had submitted their reports by the 1st of April. And there is a lot to discuss, but first we would like you to see what the most influential politicians in this country has declared. So my colleagues from Hromadske has checked to the declaration of the President, Prime Minister. So let's go through that. So for instance, President Poroshenko had declared in 2016 $400,000 of US dollars of income. This is a percentage from deposits in international investment banks. The salary of the president is a bit more than 13,000 US dollars during this year, but on his bank's accounts he has around 29 million. As we can also see, he is an owner of more than of about 100 companies. His wife, Marina Poroshenko, has declared $2,700 that is official income. We can go further to see what the Prime Minister Groisman had declared. So his income is also close to $500,000, and also he earns money as a percentage from deposits in the Ukrainian banks, and the salary during this year is $10,000 US dollars. He has 2 apartments, 4 plots of lands, 2 houses, and he can earn $1.5 million from rent. That's what is, and the largest part of his income is from the sale of the land. We also wanted to look at the income of the head of the National Bank, Valeria Hontareva, for instance. So her income is $200,000 US dollars in general, and also the largest part of it is the sale of part of an offshore company, ICU Holding Limited. And also she has some deposits at one of the Ukrainian banks, and the salary is way higher than it's $72,000 US dollars, and that's what we know about her. And we also decided to present the declaration of the head of the National Agency for Prevention of Corruption, Natalia Korchak, for instance. So she has around $50,000 US dollars of total income as well. She has no cars, but she has an apartment. So that's what Ukrainians can see if they go to the e-declaration system. But also what was interesting this particular year, I think we can this particular year, that all the civil servants should use it. And it's about 2 million of Ukrainians. Of course, for a lot of people, especially in the villages, that was not very easy. Of course, the system had been elaborated, but for many people it was not of course, the first time they were using the computer, but they had to find the different ways. Still, there was an opportunity for those who didn't manage to do that to go on during during the next 2 months. Especially it's about the people who are doing that for the first time, because there could be the criminal charges if you don't submit it, if you hadn't submitted that. But we also propose to show you a short video my colleagues had filmed in one of the villages near Ukrainian capital, how the local members of the council were dealing with that.
The service doesn't work. We only passed on the data at 3 a.m. We sat here from 10 p.m. until... It took 3 days. We only successfully sent everything this morning. After Groisman's speech, things were moving, but we haven't seen it yet. I was working for hours. Consulting you? Yes, older son. My grandson? Yes, I had difficulties with work every day. At first, this electronic key, and then declaration.
But we also have a larger controversy, and I'm joined here with Andrii Marusov, who is the chairman of the board at Transperency International Ukraine, as we are following the issue of the new law, which is considered to be controversial, as it puts some pressure, as it's considered, on the anti-corruption NGO, and as they are supposed, beside the civil servants and judges and government employees, to declare their wealth. What we knew from the last program, that it was expected that maybe there would be amendments and it wouldn't be there because some of the things are unconstitutional. The activists had met the president, but in the end he had signed the law. So what at this stage, the Transparency International were speaking really against that law and calling to abolish it. So can you explain what's really happening now?
So yeah, you rightfully mentioned that meeting of Poroshenko with the civic activists, because at that meeting, actually, Poroshenko admitted and agreed that actually that scandalous norm was unconstitutional and that it was a mistake and it should be corrected. No, basically, it should be eliminated from the law. And then he also proposed to set up the working group with the civic activists, etc., etc. So what we do see now is that there is no need to set up any working group, because according to the Ukrainian traditions, any working group is just like a burial site for any initiative, you know. If actually the president himself, he agreed that, okay, it was nonsense, softly speaking, then, okay, there is no need for further consultations or negotiations. What actually the presidential administration should do is just to make very short draft law and submit it to the parliament, and to secure certainly the support of the bloc of Petro Poroshenko, of People's Front, and of other factions in the parliament.
But what is there? Because you know, there is a debate in the Ukrainian society. A lot of people support. There are other people in the civil society as well who are maybe not anti-corruption activists, but also some of the politicians. Then why not? Why not to be transparent? And many people just don't understand what's wrong and why all of a sudden those anti-corruption activists want to hide their wealth and, you know, speak against transparency.
Yeah, it's you know, it's very funny discussion in, I would say, like a post-Soviet society with a very low legal culture. Because, for example, when I am speaking to any like foreign journalists, and I spoke with some of them this last week, so they stopped me just after the first sentence that actually, you know, there is like a bullshit and nonsense when just ordinary citizens who happen to be active citizens, they are obliged to submit these electronic declarations as civil servants, but they are not given their powers. and for any foreign kind of like German or whatever, like French or UK journalists, okay, stop, yeah, I understand that it is unconstitutional, it's just a bullshit, For them, it's, it goes without saying that it is unconstitutional.
We just see the video. That would be some of the activists who went to meet the president and more or less had this talk about abolishing not at least at that moment he still could veto it. But what it was said right after that, more or less, there was some feeling of the betrayal, that there was a discussion, but in the end, in a few hours, Mr. Poroshenko has just, enforced it.
Yeah, that's it.
And it was like considered a big loss for the civil society.
Yeah, for sure. Just because it, it resembles so much of the foreign agents' law adopted by Putin. Because actually, basically, even the wording is about anti-corruption organizations who receive technical, also kind of like receive foreign technical assistance from whatever international programs, international projects, or foreign governments. This is what actually Mr. Putin tried to do and was successful in establishing this, like a control, including also Transparency Russia, our colleagues in the chapter. And actually, they were the first who were so shocked. After this adoption of this law, they were actually shocked. And okay, guys, what is going on back in Ukraine? We thought that okay, you just like broke any ties, with all these like a Putin-style practices, but not, unfortunately.
And we, of course, are ready to talk to the parties who voted for that law, to the members of parliament, and I should ensure our audience that we had put enough of energy to ask the different members of parliament, to those who voted for that law, to be here in the studio or give us a comment. But we're glad that we have Volodymyr Ariev, who is a Ukrainian MP from Petro Poroshenko bloc, with us, at least on phone. And that would be the question to Volodymyr. Really, there is a... Thanks a lot for joining. There is a lot of criticism from the civil society and from the various institutions that this law isn't constitutional. So why would the party vote for it? Why the president and the president party would still go on with that? You probably have heard all the arguments against it.
Well, I see the sort of manipulation from all sides discussing this legislation, as well as from MPs who have been voting for that act, and NGOs too. So what I see in this case as well was absent during this voting. I didn't vote for that, but and as well I didn't research to this matter. I couldn't give you a clear answer. Was it right or not? From one hand, the transparency is good in any case. And we have been informed with some cases when NGOs working with anti-corruption cases where they had some activists that were catched up with blackmailing some persons or having bribings, and some NGOs are under the control of some politicians, and they are not really NGOs. Sometimes also we had the stories about the apartments, luxury apartments bought by in the most expensive area in Kiev for the cost of unclear origin. So I think it's like a Hippocratic oath that someone who fighting against corruption should heal itself and show transparency from itself. And we need to research more deep the international experiences, because non-profit organizations have a very special kind of reports for their incomes in the United States of America, in Romania, or in other states. So I think if NGOs want to achieve something, they will do it for sure. So I think they have an idea to make roundtables with politicians to discuss this. I think maybe it's good to withdraw some points of the Adopted Act, but we have a time until 2018 when, according to the new legislation, discuss that.
Volodymyr, thanks a lot. We really appreciate your explain the position of the party and the position of why this law had been voted. Unfortunately, of course, the phone line is not the best way to argue on that issue, but we really would like to have the better discussion. But at least we appreciate that you talk to us. I think we would be definitely better to have like a proper argument with the people in the studio. But that's not very easy to have it. We're really trying hard. But you've heard I also should mention that there was a bit of the thing that some things about the flats and apartments. I think that it was about the MPs. If we speak about the recent cases of the people who hadn't declared, or to whom there was some kind of questions from the society, it was not about the anti-government, or not anti-government. I'm sorry, anti-corruption activists. So, Andrii, what would you answer on that?
No, actually,
this is to understand that it's a very kind of a common argument we hear here about all this hypocrisy which is taking place.
What I would like to refer to what Mr. Arif was saying is that actually, if the purpose of the authors of this draft law, or now the law, true purpose would be to clean, to make transparent the civil society sector, I mean, then they would apply and propose different measures. And actually, he just mentioned is that in some countries there is a special public reports for NGOs. For example, in UK, charitable foundations, they're obliged to publish on a special website their financial reports. They're not lengthy, but at least they allow for any UK citizen or anybody, to check, what are the revenues, whether actually this charitable foundation does exist. Then certainly we can use the same for the Ukrainian NGOs, not only anti-corruption NGOs, but for all NGOs and for all charitable organizations, starting 1st January next year.
Beside that, there is definitely the demands of the donors, for instance, to really have that transparency. Yeah. But the last point would be from me. So what are we expecting at this moment? Are there still any debates? Because as it looks, the law is there, that's it.
What we do expect, as I said at the very beginning, we do expect that actually Mr. Poroshenko, he would do the next step, which he actually promised to do. He promised that, we will submit, I will submit as a presidential draft law, the draft law, we're cancelling, abolishing these or a couple of these, scandalous norms in the law. Certainly we can, help his administration in just looking through, and be sure that there is nothing, hidden corruption, bugs or something like that is absent there.
Andrii, thanks a lot for explaining that. I would like to draw your attention that Hromadske is following closely different aspects of what is happening with the anti-corruption fight. So here I just encourage you to go to our webpage and to read our recent interview with the Director of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, Artem Sitnik. Read or listen, whatever you prefer. And there he also explained about what's happening with the competition for the independent auditor. And I'll be back in a second. So, according to Over the Info, which is an online monitoring project to keep track and arrest and detainments during the protests in Russia, there were 56 people detained today in Moscow. The official figure is 31. Of course, we are following the protest since last Sunday. We can't compare them, but still it was interesting that people went to the streets. There were 3 unauthorized protests in Moscow, at least that's what we know for sure. There were some others in another Russian towns, and one of the leaders of the protest, Alexei Navalny, hadn't called for this protest, so that was also interesting. To know more what it all means and what happened today, what happened to those hundreds of people who had been detained a week ago, we called to Moscow to Grigory Akhotin, who is the founding member of this organization, which is keeping track on the detentions and what's happening to the people who are coming to the streets of Russia. Grisha, of course, everybody followed mass protests last week. They were really unprecedented, but we know about the detention in Moscow and probably other cities today. What we should know about the demonstration in Russia today and the detention and the whole situation?
It's 56 people have been detained, and it's 3 different events, so it's not organized protests. One of them is against torture, and 2 others is the reaction on last Sunday. So not a lot of detentions, and it's good news.
What is usually happening to these people? Because, and especially, what happened to those people who had been detained earlier? You know, how long usually are they staying in the police, and what would happen next with them?
There's some of them still staying, because there are two ways. They can be arrested up to 25 days, and it's around 60-70 people have been arrested, and they will sit for more 2 weeks maybe. It's including Alexei Navalny and mostly 10 people from his organization, from his foundation, and others. And mostly people haven't been arrested. They've spent from 5 to 12 hours in police departments, and or maybe 1 or 2 days. The maximum is 2 days. And for now, they're waiting for court hearings, and the result for them will be penalty around from 10 to 20 thousands of rubles. I don't know. For example, I think that it's 300 euros, something like that. And it will be hundreds and hundreds of court hearings next 3 weeks in Moscow, and it's what we are thinking about right now, how to help these people, because it's quite a penalty. So we are mostly thinking about legal assistance to these people.
But can you also put it all in context? Because during the last years, there were different kind of, there were not that many protests. They were, of course, but not of this scale. And these are really like a short-term stay in the police, then the court hearings. How we can explain the logic of the Russian law enforcement in this? You know, what is a general policy?
It's a very important question, because you should understand that there is no common policy. They do react it's tactics. They do react in very different ways in different situations and in different political moments. And for now, it was a peaceful event on Tverskaya Street, but they've made this decision to detain people and detain a lot of people, including children. I think because they've been surprised by how many people have go to this event without sanctions, because it was totally legal event, but it was not sanctioned by local authorities. It was around 15,000 of people there, and they've been surprised, and they've made this decision to detain people, because it's not so easy for people to be detained, and it's quite scaring. Some of them are still in prisons, in small police prisons. It's not real prisons, but still for 2 or 3 weeks. And what is also important that these events, these anti-corruption events, have taken place not only in Moscow and St. Petersburg, but it was hundreds of events in different cities. And for now, what's going on in Russia, that police and others, law enforcement institutions are starting to press on those who have been on streets. They are asking them to take them from schools and from universities to talk, and it's kind of political pressure. And what is important that it's going on right now every day in every city. So it's a very, very massive reaction on this protest right now.
Grisha, there was the big story which was taken by media that there were a lot of school kids, these pupils, during this particular protest. Were they also detained? What's happening to them? Because, some of them won't be considered, adult enough. Or so how are they treated?
Yeah. The protest for this time, protest events were very, very, very young. It was not only school boys, but also students from, I think they're from 16 to 21, something like that. And you can see it on videos on YouTube. But by detentions, in Moscow, it was around 70 people. So it's 5-6% of the whole amount of detained people. And with those who are younger than 18, they are free now because they can't even be arrested by Russian legislation. So they've spent a couple of hours, maybe 5 hours in police departments waiting for parents. But for now, all of them are very scaring because there can be something bad with them now in schools and etc., etc., etc.
Grisha, thanks a lot for explaining that for us, as we would follow also the court cases. And it was Grigory Akhotin who is representing Overday-Info. It's an online monitoring project to keep track on arrest and detainment during the protests in Russia. And I would also encourage you to go to our webpage. There you can see more analytical articles, also in particular of the specific of this particular demonstration in Russia, and also how the youth is participating in it. While in Belarus, still hundreds of people are detained, charged with hooliganism and participation in non-authorized demonstration. That's the reactions for protests which had taken place last week in the capital of Belarus, Minsk, and all over the country. KGB opened a criminal case for preparation of the mass gathering. Well, with that, 28 people are detained, 22 in prison, and 10 are already accused and may face from 6 months to 3 years in prison. In general, starting since the beginning of the protests in Belarus in March of this year, there were almost 900 people who had been detained. And we do have here, we report about that, but we have here Gulliver Craig, who is France 24 correspondent and covered the protests there. So we would like also the follow-up, but also to understand, how was it there? What we need to know about those particular protests, which started with some kind of a positive note. They were against this law on social parasites. So, Gulliver.
Well, the protest started earlier this year against this proposal to tax what Alexander Lukashenko, the Belarusian president, calls social parasites. It kind of seems like a tax on unemployment. Anyone who doesn't work who only works half the year should pay this tax. Of course, it's actually designed to penalize people who are working in the grey economy and not declaring their income, or who are working for foreign companies and declaring their income and paying their taxes outside Belarus. It's not actually so cruel as it seems, but in a context where Belarusian people have seen their incomes fall really drastically in the last 2 years. There's been a 2-year recession in the country, and living standards are falling very, very sharply. And unemployment is really starting to be a major issue in Belarus, which it hasn't been up until the last couple of years. So people were really angry about that. And that's what made these demonstrations very, very different from previous demonstrations that there have been in Belarus. It wasn't really people protesting for human rights or for democracy or for those kinds of issues. It was people protesting because they're sick of getting poorer.
So can you really describe, you talked to the people, what kind of people were there? Because really that was very interesting, because the previous protests, when we recall on them, they were usually after elections which were rigged or some other things. So were the different kind of people coming to the streets, not political?
Well, around Belarus, in the protests that there have been this year, there have been protests in towns that had never seen any protests before. Since Alexander Lukashenko came to power. So it's absolutely people who never before were involved in any kind of political activism. So this is something very, very new. In Minsk, though, it's a bit different, because having seen these grassroots protests springing up around the country, the political opposition, the traditional political opposition, if you like, saw the opportunity to try to, capitalize on this and have a big demonstration in the capital, Minsk. And so the people coming to that demonstration were a lot more the usual suspects, if you like, the middle class, the people who were campaigning for democracy and for greater openness in Belarus. But I did meet people who'd come in from small towns to this protest in Minsk, and perhaps naively, because the protests so far this year had been more or less tolerated with some arrests, they were expecting to be able to go to a big demonstration. And then they got to the place where the demonstration was supposed to be taking place outside the Academy of Sciences, and they saw that the police were just arresting everybody. The police presence was so huge. They had the police vans queued up around the block, and anybody who tried to go to the protest site was just arrested. I mean, the police would say, don't come here or we'll arrest you. And then if somebody tried to go, they would immediately be put in the van. So there wasn't even really a point where a crowd was able to accumulate, a crowd of any size. And they'd been blocking people from coming into the city center of Minsk since the morning. In the previous days, they'd been arresting people who might be planning to participate in this demonstration. So they really shut it down, so that the protest didn't really even happen. I
mean, you've covered numbers of protests in this area in Eastern Europe, so really we expected, not this year, but before, there were the Belarusian police is pretty brutal. It can be very, very tough. Was it as usual?
No. They were much more systematic in that they were arresting everybody who tried to come to protest. But they were less brutal in that there were some cases where they were beating people. I think there's some video that you can see people being beaten. But mostly it wasn't even necessary for them to be brutal in the sense of being violent, because there were so many of them. They so completely outnumbered the protesters that mostly they just would, be 4 policemen per protester would carry them into the van.
And besides the usual, this kind of the Belarusian opposition, we are following on them there. A lot of people are in exile. Some of them are inside the country. So were some other new groups of people, organizing or being more active? Have you seen some new grassroots, movement or some grassroots organization which were more active?
I don't know if there are any new organizations that have sprung up. But it's just like I said, not so much in Minsk, but in all these other towns around Belarus, where there have been protests, that it seems very much a grassroots thing that isn't being led by any of the traditional opposition parties.
And of course, we are looking what's happening with what will happen next, especially when President Lukashenko, Belarusian President Lukashenko, is a bit in a different position. Previously, we knew he has a really strong argument with the West. He had been called, the last European dictator of Europe.
Now he doesn't mind that. He likes being called that.
Yeah, now we have a new and a bigger and more important dictator as Vladimir Putin. But really, we didn't hear really a strong condemnation from the West. There is very interesting time when Belarus is balancing between Russia and the West. It's definitely not the we can't tell that there are really bad relations between Russia and Belarus, but still it's much worse. Why it's really the relations between the European Union and Belarus get better.
And Lukashenko, yes, had been trying to improve relations with the West. Sanctions had been lifted in the beginning of 2016. And the protests earlier this year, I think that's why there was no clampdown on the protests earlier this year in other towns around Belarus, because they didn't want to draw the anger of the West. But for some reason, he took fright. Around March 21st, that was when he announced that there was a plot for a violent uprising or a provocation of some kind for the 25th of March, and that's when he started arresting people. And it took, I think, a lot of people in the diplomatic community by surprise. According to one senior diplomat I spoke to in Minsk, the Belarusian Foreign Ministry were very, very disappointed that they were being forced to suddenly have this change of tack, because they felt they'd been making a lot of progress with improving relations with the West, and then the president suddenly, decided to go for a clampdown instead of tolerating the protest. But I think that there are a lot of people in Europe, although there are differences of opinion, but I think that there are a lot of people in the European diplomatic community who think that the answer to this is not to reimpose sanctions or to, end this process of dialogue with Lukashenko. They think that they need to just try and improve the dialogue and work particularly with the Belarusian Foreign Ministry, with whom they seem to have better relations than with the president itself.
And Gulliver, with you as a journalist who covered the protest, what would be the story to follow?
Well, everyone I spoke to in Minsk is very, very pessimistic about the economic situation. They can't imagine any solution while Lukashenko is in power. You can't expect him to impose the kinds of reforms that are needed, and which would be very, very tough reforms, and which would probably make him even more unpopular.
Also, without cheap Russian gas, for instance.
Yes, and they've got this ongoing dispute with Russia. It's not only because of the dispute with Russia, but also because the Russian economy is doing badly. That's the thing, actually. A lot of people thought that Lukashenko was the winner of the crisis in Ukraine because his image improved, he brokered the peace talks in Minsk, and so on. But actually that's not the case, because the crisis in Ukraine has led to sanctions being imposed on Russia. The Russian economy is doing very badly, and Lukashenko refused to recognize the annexation of Crimea, which made Putin angry with him and wants to put pressure on him. So Lukashenko's in a difficult position, and the economy is likely to get worse. And if the economy gets worse, people are going to be more and more unsatisfied. The big question now is, how much have they been scared by this very, very big show of police force that they put out last weekend? Probably for a while there won't be any more protests, or not attempts to have a big protest like that. But as people's living conditions deteriorate, especially, I think, in smaller towns around Belarus, possibly, somebody told me, one analyst, that it's not necessarily clear how much you can count on the loyalty of the police in these very small towns where the police know they're the neighbors of people who might be coming out to protest, and they've known them for years. Are they going to be prepared to go through with a big clampdown? Of course, in Minsk, yes, but in smaller towns, it's not so clear. And what a lot of people are predicting is that November will be the next big moment to watch, because much as in Ukraine, the Belarusian authorities are putting up tariffs on gas and electricity, and people are really going to be faced with huge bills that they won't be able to afford to pay, and they're going to be angry.
Gulliver, thanks a lot for this analysis. It's really exciting to follow and to know more and understand better. And I can promise that we will follow up the story, what's happening in Belarus. But at this stage, I also would like to propose to your attention the interview we made with Mark Galeotti, who is a senior researcher at the Prague Institute of Foreign Affairs. I'm sorry. So I think it's already time to go for that. The title is Trump's White House Looks Like Putin's Kremlin. And Mark, explain you why, and I'll be back in a week. Mark, so what is interesting in this stage, we can see the sign that there might be used different unconventional ways to influence Trump administration, in particular when you speak about Russia, and maybe just not that, connected to not just political figures. So what we know about that, how probable is that, what should we watch out?
Well, it's interesting because precisely when you say what do we know about it, the honest answer is, in detail, often very little. But in practice, it is clear we have an increasing array of cases relating to a whole variety of different figures, whether it's the former National Security Advisor, General Flynn, whether it's Trump's own family or whatever, of people who clearly have had access and have had contacts that one wouldn't expect in, shall we say, a normal American administration. And what it speaks to, I would say, is that there is a certain culture at work in this administration, which essentially is very permissive. It's permissive about people who might have dubious backgrounds, dubious activities, but the point is, if they're useful, if they're flattering, if they can bring business contracts or whatever, then they get through the door. And therefore, although I've never really accepted this notion of that somehow Trump is some kind of Russian puppet or whatever, I think it's more that this is an administration which is open to being hired, shall we say, in very specific cases. And whether it's the Russians or whether it's China or whoever else, the point is that's the culture at work. It's a culture which is actually permissive of such non-formal, non-traditional contacts.
We had recently a couple of scandals connected to some, I don't know, Ukrainian MP reaching out to Michael Flynn, or Saturn, who turned to be the friend of Trump. But it's also confusing for the public that they just don't really understand what makes sense, what doesn't.
Well, that's the thing, exactly. It is confusing because there is not a nice, single, neat narrative. In some ways, it would be a lot easier if as some say, oh, well, it's clear that President Trump is being blackmailed by the Russians, or something else that has a sort of a nice, clear assessment. But it's not. The real problem is almost one, it sounds ridiculous to put it in these terms, that this is an administration that does not recognize the etiquette of American governance that we have seen in the past. It doesn't matter if they've been Republican or Democrat White Houses. They have accepted a certain sense of this is what you do and this is what you don't do, and particularly that anyone who is closely connected to the president has to be not just beyond reproach, but seen to be beyond reproach. Now we have a president who clearly, first of all, values loyalty almost above everything else. So if you're close to him, unless you do something truly disastrous, then you're safe. Secondly, a president who values the notion of deal-making. Now, deal-making is by definition the opposite of values. It is not there are things that are right and things that are wrong. It's for everything. It's, well, what's the price tag? And the third key element of this particular White House is the way we've seen decision-making move in a non-institutionalized way. It now gets handed out to relatives and friends and close allies. The key decisions are being done in secretive little corners rather than visibly, as we've seen with like negotiations with Congress or even meetings of the usual security bodies. So I think that in some ways, bizarrely, Trump's White House does look quite a bit like Putin's Kremlin, in that exactly it's a sort of a post-institutionalized way. But what it means is there is no clear division between people who are in government and out of government, people who are in Trump's inner circle and people who are outside of Trump's inner circle. And what that means is that, in a way, the whole problem is the very confusing nature of this political system. It's totally deinstitutionalized. And that means that almost anyone can become relevant. We had the case, for example, of Michael Flynn, and that sense of, well, is he being influenced? Well, not only had he taken Russian money through RT, he'd also taken much, much more Turkish money. And again, so the question becomes, well, okay, could he have also been a Turkish agent of influence or whatever? No, we don't know. But that's the thing. There are a lot of people who are making a lot of money out of their connectivity with politics. And we never know what the price tag is, really, what that money is buying. Is it something just simply buying 2 hours of someone's time to give a speech at a dinner? Or is it actually buying access into the central policy-making circles of this White House?
And you're looking closely, and the the way the Kremlin works, and also how the world of the Russian business and the Russian crime are connected. So what could be the role of that?
Well, this is something that particularly bothers me, and something that I think is very clear. When we talk about the current sort of hybrid war campaign, I don't really like that term, but political war campaign that the Russians are waging against the West. And by the West, it means everything from Ukraine just beyond the battle lines all the way through to the United States and beyond. It is clear that the Russians have essentially adopted an approach to mobilize every asset that is at their disposal. You might be a totally private Russian company or a private Russian individual, but from time to time, the state might come to you and say, we want you to do X. And that could be put some money into a political party in this country, or it might be, as we saw, sort of provide a base for a Russian agent in New York, as came out quite recently.
Not very clear between the particular people who are close to Trump in Russia, like some business for his former business partners or people with that connection who are already there, whom we know who are the faces.
Well, there are clearly sort of social contacts and business contacts, particularly almost the Trump Tower mafia, the people who, and I use mafia broadly, you know, the people who worked in and out of his own sort of main tower in New York. But I think I'd want to actually focus just on a couple of figures which I think are significant. I mean, Rex Tillerson, the current Secretary of State, I mean, clearly his oil interests mean that he already has a direct relationship with Russia. And although he says he has now sort of divorced himself from his old Exxon contacts, it doesn't work that easily. And he must no doubt be thinking, well, what is he going to do when he's no longer Secretary of State? So there is a direct case of a business contact. You know, Exxon does have very, very strong connections with Russia. The second one I would sort of point out to is a more ideological connection, and that is the Stephen Bannon connection, the man who is the sort of the Rasputin of the White House these days. A guy who has a very radical political and social agenda. And it is clear that not only, you know, does he and his movement have all kinds of connections with Russians, ranging from ideologists of the Russian Orthodox Church through to people who are sort of much more almost Leninist in their views. But this is clearly a man who looks at a figure like Putin not as a direct example. I mean, I'm not saying that he wants Trump to become America's Putin, but nonetheless, he looks to an authoritarian leader for whom democratic structures are just simply a transmission belt for your instructions rather than real controls. And he's looking at countries like Russia for examples. So, I mean, I think it's clear that we have both ideological as well as business politics at work within the White House at the moment.
Територія мистецтва – це територія особливих людей з непереборною потребою ділитися з людьми добром, непереборною потребою шукати краще в душі людській. І тут неважливо, хто стоїть на кону. Актор, який закінчив театральний вуз, чи актор-аматор, який все своє життя віддає людям. Саме таких людей ви побачите на